Hello everyone, welcome to part 3 of our port forwarding video series. So currently this is where we are over here. So we're doing dynamic port forwarding using Chisel and Proxychains. Just a recap of our previous part. So for part 0 we did an introduction to port forwarding where we explained what port forwarding is, the various types, and what we'll be doing in the subsequent parts. And then in part 2, we went into the practical demonstration of port forwarding, started with local port forwarding using SSH. And then in part 3, we did local port forwarding using Chisel. So we had to download Chisel from GitHub. And then we saw how to use Chisel to do port forwarding. So in this part, which is part 3, we'll be using Chisel as well alongside proxy chains to do dynamic port forwarding. Okay, so if you followed from the previous parts, you realize that our lab we're trying to use a virtual hacking lab. So the platform we're using Hack the Box platform. So the remote machine that we are trying to port forward from is a server on Hack the Box. All right. So this is the IP address. So this particular server actually has some ports that are not exposed to us. So we are going to find a way to port forward them onto our local machine so that we can access them. All right, so this IP address, I have scanned it. So if you go, you can see that I did a port scan. So I used Rust scan to scan the ports on the IP address as a remote machine, and then we realized that we had 2 ports. Okay, so 2 ports were exposed to us, so we could see 2 ports. All right, so this is fine, but we also have SSH credentials for that machine. Okay, so we have a username from Docky and then a password of Manchester United. So if you do SSH, we can SSH into the remote machine, and then yeah, so the machine is called Formula X, and then the user Frank Docky is the one having the current session. All right, so after we have SSH in, if we use SS tag LMPT, we can see listening ports. All right, so we realized that we had so many ports. Apart from these 2 ports that we discovered from Nmap, we have other ports, but these ports we couldn't see them because they are local. Okay, so these ports are only local to the machine, so they are not exposed to us from an external source. All right, so our task now is to use port forwarding techniques to expose these ports to our local system. So that's the benefit, or that's the whole idea about the port forwarding we are going to do. Okay, so yeah, so we use two techniques already. So we use SSH, and then we also use Chisel. So now we're going to use Chisel as well, but with proxy chains to port forward all the ports. So we're going to do dynamic port forwarding. So in the previous session we did local port forwarding, but it wasn't dynamic. We had to port forward every individual port so that we could access it. But with dynamic port forwarding with proxy chains, we can just do it once and all the ports are going to be exposed to us. So let's do that, and then we're going to use Chisel. So I downloaded Chisel from the previous session. If you don't have Chisel, I think we can go, you just type Chisel GitHub. It will take you to their GitHub repo. All right, so it's over here, and then you head over to the releases. So we are trying to grab a binary, a Chisel binary, but you have to download the right binary. From our previous lab, I think part 2, we downloaded the wrong binary. All right, so our machine is a Linux machine, and then the remote machine is also a Linux machine, so we need a Linux binary. So you come for this one, Chisel Linux AMD64. all right, so you download this one onto your local machine and then you extract it. We've already done that. We're not going to do the download again. So let's see. If I list, I can see that we have the binary, the Chisel binary here, so I don't need to download it again. Right, so what I will do is I'm going to do another SSH session. I'm going to leave this session open so that I can see the ports, and then I'll grab another shell, and then let's say SSH. So Frank at what was the IP? We'll be trying to SSH into the box again. So I'm just trying to get another shell, so we can have 2 shells. All right, and then the password is Manchester United. Alright, so I have another shell on the Formula X machine, just clear screen, and when I list, I can see that we have Chisel. So the Chisel was already transferred from our last session. Alright, so if you don't know how to transfer it, you can use you can stage it with Python HTTP server. So I think that was what we did. So what we did was, I think, Python 3 -m http.server, and then yeah, so it's a stage, and then we could download it with wget from our remote machine here. All right, but we're not going to go that step again because we already have the file on our remote system. So that's what we have to do. All right, so what do we do? So so Chisel, you have to have two forms. Okay, you have to have you have to run it as a server and then as a client. All right, so the server is going to be run on our local machine. So you have to run Chisel as a server on the local machine, and then you run it as a client on the remote machine. So let's do that. So here is our local machine. All right, so we are on our local machine, and then let's list. Yeah, you can see Chisel here. So I'll just say Chisel, and then we run it as a server here, and then we're doing a reverse tunneling, and then we listening on ports. You can specify any port that you want, but I just feel like using 555. You don't have to use 555. You can use any port that you like. All right, and then you go to the client. All right, sorry, to the remote server, and then you have to run Chisel as a client. All right, so we say Chisel client, and then all right, so here you want to connect back to our local machine, so our local machine's IP address. Okay, so you can find that out. So I think we're going to use our tan0 IP address. So let's find our tan0 IP address. We use IPA, and then if you grep for tan0, you can see our tan0 IP address, which is 10.10 14 144. all right, so and then the port that we are listening on is port 555, which is what we specified here from our server, and then you are doing a reverse port forwarding. All right, we specified that already here, and now you can grab 127.0.0.1, and then now, instead of specifying a port like we did in the previous part, we are going to specify SOCKS. All right, so we are going to use a SOCKS proxy. All right, so it's gonna port forward every port for us. All right, so if this is right, we should get our connection. Okay, what's happening here? No such directory. Let's see. Chisel, yeah, so Chisel server is sorry, Chisel client is working. Did I specify client? Okay, yeah, so yeah, so my bad. So what we were going to do was to specify Chisel client and not client, not slash client. So I'm just going to clear the screen, and then it's Chisel. Chisel is the binary, is the file, and then we'll specify client, and then we're going to connect back to our tan0 IP address on port 555. all right, and then it's going to be a reverse port forwarding to localhost. all right, I think we need a colon here, and then instead of specifying a port like we did in the previous parts or the previous videos, we just use SOCKS. all right, so we're gonna use SOCKS. all right, so we can see that we have the connection here, and then it's using proxy chains, and then it's forwarding all the traffic to this particular IP and then this port. all right, so you have to add this particular socket or IP and port to our proxy chain config file from our local machine. All right, so let's copy that and then head over to our local machine. So the proxy chains have been set up, but it's not complete. You need to edit the proxy chains config file. Let me close this, and then let's say Sublime. Let's open it on Sublime. etc proxy chain.conf. Okay, so this is our proxy chain config file, and then you come down to the bottom or anywhere you want to put it. Okay, so we say SOCKS. You can use SOCKS 4, but we want to use the latest SOCKS, which is SOCKS 5, and then we can put our IP and then port. All right, so the port that you get here is the same port you're going to use. So the port that is connected to, so it's connected to port 1080. All right, so that's the same port that we're going to use. So where's our config file? Yeah, and then you can see that there's a space between the IP and then the port, and then you specify the first thing as SOCKS 5. That's what we're going to use, and then you save it. Okay, I think it requires authentication. Okay, so I think let me do it this way. No worries, I'll just close this, close without saving, and then I'll go back and then home sudo. All right, okay, so now we've opened it with root privilege, and then we can edit. All right, so I'll just paste back my proxy, my new SOCKS. All right, okay, so I think the configuration file is done. So what we have to do, we are not done, so we can try to see. So if you try to access anything, so let's try to access this port, let's say port 3000. Okay, it's not going to work because we are not done. So what happens is that you need to actually configure your browser to work with proxy chains. All right, so I'm using Foxy Proxy. So if you use Foxy Proxy, you come to options, you can add a new proxy profile. So this is BEP, so this one is used for BEP suites. I use it for BEP proxy. So I'm just going to add a new one, so I'll call it chains, or let's say proxy chains. Oh, okay, this one is searching. So yeah, I think this is where the title is going to be, proxy chains, and then the type is, we're going to use SOCKS 5. That's what we put in the config file, and you can leave this once, and then we use 127.0.0.1, and then our port was port 1080. All right, you don't have to forget that. So when you come back here, you can see that we have port 1080, and then the IP address 127.0.0.1. all right, so that should be fine. All right, and then you don't need to set anything, no authentication, so just save. All right, so if we save and then we go back to our browser, and we don't have to select the profile that we just created. So we created a proxy chain profile, so we want the traffic to be proxy through this profile, and then we can see that we are now able to access the remote port, and then whatever application is running on the remote port on our local machine. So the proxy chain had worked. And then I told you about the beauty of proxy chains. So that one, it does dynamic port forwarding. So all the ports are dynamically forwarded onto our local machine. So we can try that. You see that we didn't specify any port. We didn't specify that, oh, you should proxy, you should port forward 3000. or port forward 8000. We didn't say any of that, but let's see if we can access another port apart from 3000. Let's check. So this time around, instead of 3000, 8000. So you can see that 8000 is also working. We've not done anything aside just doing the setting up the SOCKS and then the configuration files and all that. That's all what we did. All right, and then all the ports are forwarded to us, so we can check for other ports. We can check for 8081. It's going to work as well. So that's the beauty of proxy chains, using proxy chains. Yeah, so this one works as well. Okay, yeah, so similarly this one is also going to work. 8082. So this is 8081. So 8082 is going to work as well. All right. Yeah. So that's basically about it. So we'll be able to use dynamic port forwarding. We'll be able to do dynamic port forwarding using Chisel and proxy chains. So this part is done. Okay, and then we have access to all the ports as they go. Okay, so if you know how to do the dynamic port forwarding with proxy chains, I don't think, well, unless you just have only one port to deal with, it's always good to forward all the ports so that you don't have to be forwarding individual ports. So I always prefer to go with the dynamic port forwarding, especially if I see more than one port of interest that I want to access later. All right, so that's it about this video. So let's see, the next video we're going to use Ligolo engine to do the same kind of dynamic port forwarding. All right, so I hope you enjoy the video. Make sure you don't forget to like and subscribe, and then I will see you in the part 4 where we'll do dynamic port forwarding using Ligolo engine.